Our next interview, conducted in March 2024, is with one of Blair Atholl's best-loved residents, who looks after the plants in the village in the summer months and has played a key role in the renovation of the village hall.
Hello, I'm Neil Mackintosh, and I was born in 1942, but not in Blair Atholl because it was during the war and my father was called up. So my mother moved to the farmhouse, my grandfather's farmhouse at Murrayshire, so I was born there. So although I'm a Blair Atholian, I wasn't born here, but I still think of myself as Blair Atholl. I spent most of my boyhood here and all my teenage years here. Apart from 2 years, I went back to the farm because my mother wasn't well, and that was it. So basically, I'm very much a Blair Atholl person. I learned to play golf here, and I became addicted to golf. And when I left school at 14, I helped my father in the shop at Richard Tilt, but I practiced so hard because I just wanted to get away and become a golf professional, which I eventually did when I was 19. So that was me away from the village until 50 odd years later, when I came back, when I retired as a golf professional to my own village, Blair Atholl. My memories are not just of the station itself, but of the railway, really. So it seemed to me when I was a boy in the village, which would have been when I was 6 and onwards, all the males in the village, or most of them, majority of them, either worked in the estate or the station, and the railway included. And the incredible difference of today, when that was the hub of the village in a sense, and now it's just over there, but not doing all that much, you know. So there were obviously people worked as there was a station master who was quite a respected person in the village at that time. There was obviously an assistant station master. There were drivers, guards, ticket collectors, and people who worked at the shunting sheds. And amongst them, there were quite a lot of characters, really. And I can mention a few. There was my special friend and mentor was Jock Sutherland, who was a wheel tapper, which I don't know if you know what a wheel tapper is, but it's somebody who goes round and checks the wheels for every train that comes in, and checks for the heat and checks that they're okay. He swung the hammer a lot at the job, and his golf swing was much the same. It was that type of movement he did. But he was a very good golfer and a very keen golfer, and he introduced me to golf. And for the rest of my time in Blair Atholl, Jock Sutherland was my hero. And that gave me helped to give me my career for the 50 years. Jock was also the cadet leader, and he took the cadets at the shunting shed at the station, and my brother was a cadet when that. And the village knew Jock and his cadets as Jock Sutherland's army, and they would march to church occasionally, and he had them all exceptionally smart and so forth. And there's many, many tales that not always good ones, that my brother told me about his time in the cadets. There was a Jock Mackenzie, who was a train driver, who was called Pimple. Because he had a pimple on his nose. So everybody called him Pimple. But there's one story I like that my mother used to tell. My mother had a great sense of humour, and Jock, or Pimple, became chairman of the community council. And my mother met a Mrs. Robertson one day after this news was broken that Jock was the community council chairman. And Mrs. Robbins said to Mum, you know, Pimple will go on until he's reached number 10. And my mother found that hugely amusing and told that story for years later. So that was the kind of characters you were meeting from at the station. And everyone you knew, and most of them actually had nicknames. So it was typical village life at that time. When I think of the station, my memory immediately goes to 10 to 9, which was the time the train school came in for the train came in to take us to school at Pitlochry. So 10 to 9 was always huge in my mind. It was always called the 10 to 9 train. And I can't remember waiting there for much in the summer for the train, but I can remember particularly waiting in the winter when it was freezing down at that time. But occasionally the station master put the fire on in the waiting room, and that was a real blessing to get down from Bridge Tilt and into the waiting room and see a fire. It wasn't much of a fire, but it was enough to keep you warm until the train came. Often the highlight of the train coming in was when it didn't actually come in, because it was snowed up at somewhere up at Dalwhinnie or Dalmaspit or somewhere, and it didn't come. So you had a day off school, which was great. Another memory I have of the station is the bookstall, which I don't think you get now at stations, but the bookstall was always quite a busy place, and especially on Sundays, because all the shops were closed on Sundays, but you got your Sunday papers at the bookstall. It seems to me that the Crichton dynasty in the village was always in control of the bookstall, because the three sisters all had years doing the bookstall. One once left, the other sister took over. So there was always a Miss Crichton at the bookstall, which was meant something. That would be between 1946 and 1950, late on the 1950s even, I think that would be the bookstall was there. It illustrates how busy the station was when they needed a bookstall there, and how important it was to people getting off the train and getting something and then getting back onto the train again. The signal box was very special to me. There was a Hugh Ross who was the signal master, or signal man, I think you called him. And occasionally he would invite my brother David and me up to the signal box, which was a really exciting occasion. And we would sit there with him as the trains came in, and he worked the bells would ring to be at a certain point. He would work the floor levers. I'm not quite sure what that was for, but I think it was maybe to change the lines so that the train came into the right position. And every train that came in, and again, I'm not quite sure what happened, but the driver would put out his hand with a leather satchel and connect it to a hook, and the signalman would open the window and take that in. It was probably to record something, I'm not sure. But that was, and it was very special to be invited up to do that. And I remember in particular because he had a big hole in his hand, and he had been shot during the war, and the bullet had gone right through his hand, and it was very obvious. It was always a part of when you saw him working, you always saw this hand, his hand. It's funny the memories that come back to you when you think of things like this. The little things that you think about mostly. Another thing I enjoyed doing was when the Scout Jamboree was on. I don't know what age I'd be, maybe 6 or 7, but I would go up to the stand on the bridge, and as the trains came and watch all the scouts from all over the world come off the train for the Jamboree. And it was quite a thing to think of me standing there, never having been out of Blair Atholl, I don't think, but there on the platform with so many people, young boys from all over the world, all colours and all of that. And I don't know what, it's a very moving occasion for me to see them arriving. It just felt such an international thing to see this happening to a wee village like Blair Atholl. And it was even more emotional when they were leaving. I would go up and stand on the bridge and see them all leaving, and there would be a piper there, and he'd be playing Will You No Come Back Again. And I think I even cried when that was happening, because it was such an emotional thing. In my mind was, I wonder if they ever will come back again, So that was for me, that was brilliant memories of the station. the war hadn't long finished then, and my dad went to Egypt for the last spell. He didn't come back till 1946. That's when we came back from up north to the village. So, yeah, there was an instance there that happened. My brother and I were standing at the gates station, the railway gates one night, and it was dark, and the train came and stopped, and someone opened the window at the top, slid the windows up. I can see it happening yet, and there were soldiers. I thought they were American soldiers, but on hindsight, they were maybe Canadian soldiers. They weren't British soldiers, and they threw us out 2 bars of chocolate, and I can see they were just wrapped up in silver paper, and we didn't know what they were, but we got one each, and off the train went, and we ran home with those. We didn't know chocolate bars, and to my mum at Tulloch Road, and when we opened them, it was dark chocolate, and I remember the bitterness of them, because we had never had chocolate. It was something different, and I think that's when I really fell in love with chocolate, because I still love my chocolate today, but not milk chocolate. I don't like milk chocolate, but the dark chocolate. So that was my first, because you didn't get sweets then, everything would be rationed and so forth. So to get some of that it was a miracle, that happened. And I can see the 2 soldiers yet looking out at this window and throwing the chocolate at us. So that was a nice memory of the railway crossing, There's another lovely story that I've written a story about. It was about a Mrs. Masson, who lived at the railway cottages just across from me. And the story goes, and it is true because I followed it up and it was true. It was a winter's night and it was snowing, and there was a whist drive on at the village hall here. And Mrs. Masson and Mrs. Ferguson, who lived next door, decided to go to the whist drive. And it was dark, snowing, windy, apparently. And they came to the crossing, just outside. It was closed, but Mrs. Masson knew about trains and things, so she said, we'll go across. We'll still go across. There was a gate at the side gate. We'll just go across. Mrs. Masson, no, don't do that. Oh, yes, we'll go, she said. Well, Mrs. Masson started off and went halfway across the plane, and suddenly this engine was right at her. So she dived down between the lines, and the train went right over her, And poor Mrs. Ferguson, I spoke to Mrs. Ferguson's daughter not long ago about it, and Mrs. Ferguson was just hysterical, because she had lost her friend. Mm-hmm. But no, Mrs. Masson got up and dusted herself down, got her handbag, and came onto the hall for the whist drive. So that was 2 instances of the level crossing that still stick very much in my mind, When I left in 1962, I don't think there's a station master anymore. There was a Jimmy McBain. You've probably heard of Jimmy McBain. He became everything, apparently. And Jimmy was a real character. He was a good badminton player. I used to play badminton with him. What a character he was, And I think people, the stories I've got is that people, years later still wrote to Jimmy because he looked after them so well when they came off the station and so forth. I love train travel much more so but I would never go on a bus if I could help it. But trains, yeah, definitely.